I'm live. I'm reading out of Lord of the Horizon. I'm now in the third part of this far memory book by Joan Marshall Grant. She was able to remember her past incarnations. She's written 7 books about this, and she is in this life Ra-Ab. This place in ancient Egypt, and it is chapter 10 now, Princess PTAH-KEFER. Before giving his consent to the marriage, I had expected Royden to wish to see PTAH-KEFER. But when I asked him if he wanted the girl to be brought to him, he smiled and said, "Has Senusert forgotten that when he told me of what he experienced in the guise of a beggar, he mentioned that he had spent a few days in the jackal on his way home?" He tried very hard to make his voice sound casual, but when he mentioned that the daughter of the people who had succored him was a priest who had healed his sickness, it was obvious that he felt for her much more than gratitude. I have spoken of her to Hanuk's high priest, in whose temple she was trained, and everything he had told me made me very glad that Senusert has made so wise a choice. On earth, she and I are still strangers, yet I know her well. When she wears the white crown, it will not be for the first time. What do you know about her mother and father? Though it is a matter of no importance, the two who call her daughter are but foster parents. They know nothing of her history and think her family died in that pestilence which broke out in the reed soon after the dawn. They found her lying in a small cedar wood chest, the lid open, under a shade tree on the boundary of the reed and the jackal. It was 2 or 3 years before they lost their fear that she might be claimed and taken from them. Why would a child be abandoned, even if its parents died in the pestilence? The outbreak was not serious enough to cause any disorder. Only a few villages were affected, and there were less than 100 dead. I too thought the story very unlikely, but as I did not want to arouse comment by making inquiries, I found out all I needed to know by using the faculty of Anubis. I read PTAH-KEFER's memory, though the events which I recorded occurred when she was a baby, and so she has no recollection of them in her waking mind. Her father was a noble of the reed, and her mother his favourite concubine. At the time of Amenemhet's accession, he was suspected of being unworthy to continue in his office, but we had not sufficient evidence to decree his exile. 2 years later, he proved himself incompetent to hold any authority under the waters, but he was given the opportunity of going into voluntary exile. It was thought that both the concubine and her 6-month-old daughter accompanied him out of Egypt. The concubine went, but she loved the 2 lands so dearly, rather than condemn the child to a life among foreigners, she gave it into the care of a servant, who was to take it to a kinsman, who lived in the nome of the tortoise. The nurse was afraid that if it were known that the child was the daughter of an exile, she might be punished for helping a member of a family which had incurred Pharaoh's displeasure. You must remember, Ra-Ab, that this was in the early days, when there were many who had not lost their fear of authority. On her way south, the woman became ill of the pestilence. She tried to continue her journey, leading a donkey in whose panniers were the baby and the cedar chest. She must have known she was very ill. Perhaps she realized she was dying. She put the baby in the chest under the tree and rode on in search of help. She must have had a sudden seizure. She died alone and unrecognized, was buried and forgotten. Which story shall be told to the people? Neither. It should be sufficient for everyone that PTAH-KEFER is both a priest and the beloved of Senusert. When he returns from the Oryx At his side will be the woman who is his wife, the Princess PTAH-KEFER. To bring happiness to Senusert, Mary and I were very willing to enter with him into a small deception. He wanted us to go to the jackal, not as nomarchs, but as his parents. We were to travel in a manner suitable to a couple who owned a few fields and a small herd of cattle. If they saw you as nomarchs before they had a chance to know you, they might be embarrassed, he said. They are not noble except in their hearts. They thought me nameless, yet they treated me as their son. I must go gently with them, for if they knew the circumstances to which I had been born, they might treat me as a stranger. Surely PTAH-KEFER knows who you are, exclaimed Mary. She knows that we love each other, and that there were reasons why I could not tell her where I came from or who I am. She assured me that nothing would make any difference to our love, and reminded me that even wise men break laws, and that all of us have left the causeway at some time in our long history. Does she have no suspicion of who you are? She may think I'm a thief, or even that I had to leave my village because I killed a man, but she looks to the horizon, to the future we shall share. She said that all yesterdays belonged to the dead years, and that a burden need no longer be carried when again we turn our faces to the sun. She was willing to marry you without knowing anything about you, not even where you came from. When I asked her that, she said, "We come from the gods, and we shall return into their company. Can you measure the road to the horizon in thumb joints, or our 10,000 years in little yesterdays?" So on the 12th day of the 4th month of the sowing, Senusert, Mary, and I went to the jackal. I wore the kilt and woolen cloak of a prosperous husbandman, and Mary was dressed in a manner suitable to his wife. Her only ornaments were a necklace of rough turquoise, strung on a plaited linen thread, and 2 armlets of copper. Senusert permitted us to travel by litter until we came within about 1,000 paces of our destination, when we went on foot, with a pack donkey carrying the few possessions he had allowed us to bring. A girl was coming along the road towards us, and when I saw Senusert's face, I did not need to ask whether she was PTAH-KEFER. He ran ahead and took her in his arms. Then they stood hand in hand, waiting for us to join them. She was not so tall as Mary, yet the beautiful proportions of her body gave an illusion of height. She gave us the greeting between kinsmen, and I saw that she had the serene and fearless eyes of a true priest. I was amused to notice that she was trying to put us at our ease. It was obvious that she believed us to belong to a caste inferior to her own, and was afraid lest we be embarrassed. Did not our father own 1,000 by 1,000 paces, have a herd of cows and a bull already famous enough to be sought as a sire for other men's herds? Did he not have a house of 6 rooms with separate quarters for the 3 women who worked in the house and the 4 men who helped in the fields? She tried to end our shyness by showing how deeply she honored our son. Many children in the Oryx had been called Mary or Ra-Ab, so I knew that our names would cause no comment. Her mother was waiting for us by the outer door, which led directly into the main room. "This is Mary and Ra-Ab, mother," said PTAH-KEFER, and then Senusert turned to us and said, "The name of PTAH-KEFER's mother is Nia, and of her father, Beras." Nina told us that our host had not known the hour of our arrival and was busy with some duty on his estate. While we were waiting for him, she gave us mead and sweet cakes, and talked of matters which she thought likely to interest us: the prospects of the next harvest, whether any of our animals had suffered during the winter, which had been unusually cold, whether we lived near enough to the river to get fish, and if not, had our village a fish pond? Before her husband joined us, with profuse apologies that he had not been there to greet us at the door, Senusert and PTAH-KEFER had found some excuse to wander off together. Soon afterwards, Nia took Mary to see the room we were to occupy. At first, Beras did not mention Senusert, but instead talked of how under the old rule he had been a leader of 100 and had been severely wounded during a border skirmish, which ended his usefulness as a warrior. This farm had been his wife's inheritance from her mother, and during the last 15 years they had prospered and been able to acquire more land. "I hope you feel assured," he said courteously, "that both my wife and I have given our warm approval to the marriage of our daughter. Your son told me very frankly that he had no name or position, but he is young and healthy, and if he wishes to become a farmer, I will make over 1/3 of my property to my daughter on her marriage day. At the death of my wife and myself, all that we have shall be theirs." "I too will try to help them," I said. I saw this troubled him. He paused for a moment as though searching for words which would not hurt my pride, before saying, "I want you to believe that it would bring joy to my wife and myself to help your son. Soon he will be my son too. It happens that the gods have been generous to me, and do for our children what we have suggested will be no hardship. I understand from Senusert that you have fewer possessions than I have, though in those treasures which a man can carry with him when he goes on the long journey, I feel sure you are much richer than myself. Your son must never feel indebted to me, so perhaps it would be as well if he thought they received an equal portion from us both. That the shares are not equal must remain our secret. Will you not allow me this privilege? For I am an old man, and it would give me great happiness." To refuse this offer seemed so grave a discourtesy, yet to accept it was to deceive him. What was I to do? I was saved having to make an immediate decision by PTAH-KEFER coming into the room to tell us that the evening meal was prepared. I was only alone for a moment with Mary, but she whispered to me, "They have decided that you must be a very hard-hearted father to have turned your son out of the house." I couldn't explain without betraying Senusert's secret. Of course, Nia didn't say it directly, but it was obvious what she was thinking. What did she say? She was praising Senusert, saying how handsome he was and how proud I must be of him. Then she added, "It is a pity that men sometimes forget that they too were impulsive when they were young. You are his mother, and I'm sure you are never angry with him. It must have been terrible for you until he was allowed to return to his father's house." Having heard this, I was not surprised when Beras said to me later in the evening, "I have never inquired what caused Senusert to come here nameless and apparently without a friend. He must have done something which greatly angered you, otherwise you could not have denied your son even when anger was in its first heat. Are we not perhaps sometimes unduly harsh with our sons, because we have decided that they shall become like ourselves, or rather, as we consider ourselves to be? My father was not a warrior. He was a merchant in the chief city of the Leopard. He told me that as a soldier I would always be poor, and when I insisted, he said that if I left his house, I should never return to it. I never did return, nor did I hear that he was dead until he had been in his grave for 3 years. If there is still in your heart a trace of anger against your son, I beg you to recognize that it is a stranger who has entered your courtyard as a thief to steal your happiness. I repeat that I have no wish to know what Senusert did, but are you sure that you would be angry with him if you knew the motive which made him act? He may have stolen, but do you know why he stole? He may have killed a man, but are you sure he did not consider it an act of justice? I see that in you my son has a most loyal friend. I took him into my house because he was in need. Had I denied him, why should the gods remember me when I am in trouble? He was in trouble. Sorry. was a stranger, yet both my wife and I felt that it was familiar to have him under our roof. He was in pain, and his pain became ours, as though we were indeed of one flesh. When, with my daughter, he found love, he again knew the happiness of young lovers. We again knew the happiness of young lovers. Though I wish to give my possessions to Senusert, because he has made my daughter happy, because I love him as a son. There is yet another reason why I wish him to be my heir, a reason which I do not fully understand. I feel that if I were undecided whether to turn to the right or to the left, he would be able to tell me which path to follow. If I were afraid, I would be strong in his presence, and if I were dying, I would wish him to act as my steersman. You think that my son, who came to your house as a beggar, who must have deeply angered his parents for him to have been friendless and alone, yet has such character that you accept his judgment without question? I do, said Beras fervently. You may call me a fool for seeking wisdom from a boy of 18, but he has a quality I've never before seen except in rulers, such as Amenemhet. And you would trust your daughter to him, even without knowing who he is or whence he came? I have already done so. What if he does not wish to stay on your land? He left my house, why should he not leave yours? That is for him to decide. One thing only shall I ask of him, that where he goes, there shall my daughter go also. For if they were parted, she would know bitter sorrow. He has often talked to me of distant countries. What would you say if he took your daughter to live in the land of gold, or even became a trader with the people of Punt? Wherever he goes, she can work beside him. If she is not a healer, is she not a healer priest? And are there not sick people to be succored in the name of Ptah in every land which Ra sees on his journey across the sky? I am old and selfish, and therefore I hope that it is in this nome that she will work. But who am I to judge whether Ptah wishes Egyptians to be healed by her, or men whose skins are of different colour and whose language I do not understand? But they will understand her language, for all men and all animals, even the plants and the rocks, are fellow kinsmen of Ptah, in whose name she brings them life. I am very honoured by what you have told me. We are two men no longer so very young, yet let us for a moment imagine that we were magicians, as perhaps we often pretended when we were children. I have heard that the eyes of Horus boasts that one day there will be no one in the two lands who has not the wildest scope for his talents, nor will there be one overburdened by a task too great for him. It is not always easy to assign each man his task. Even the most fruitful branch may break if the crop is too heavy for its growth. If the decision were yours, to what position would you assign Senusert? I would give him wide authority. Tomorrow I should have him declared headsman of our village, and soon the people themselves would make him the overseer of the town. Why stop at a town? I said as though in jest. Why not make him the nomarch? If I thought that Hanuk and his wife could be improved upon, I should gladly put Senusert in their place, but they are so well beloved that I would not deprive them of their office, even to advance my son. There are other gnomes than the jackal. Would you make him nomarch of the Oryx? As you come from the Oryx, of what you should be a better judge than I. But from all I have heard, Amenemhet will be a worthy successor to Ra-Ab Hotep, and no gnome could ask for more. There are other gnomes. Shall we make him nomarch of one of them? You may jest, he said almost angrily, but if you do, I shall claim to be a better judge of your son than you are yourself. I would make him a nomarch, even though his father is only a farmer, like myself, and has never even been a warrior in his youth. He got up and put my arm around his shoulders. My friend, one who is so wise in the weighing of men's hearts must no longer waste that talent, even on such admirable fields as your own. Pharaoh has need of men like you, for even in our time they are rare. You are not deceived because a man is poor, nor will you be deceived because he is rich. You are not afraid to uphold your judgment, even if it must seem that the one to whom you speak has had greater opportunity of knowing the facts than yourself. That is the quality which is required by those who hold the ivory seal of Pharaoh. Pharaoh will not forget. For a moment he looked puzzled, and then he laughed. For a moment you looked so serious that I forgot we were speaking in jest. Although I am held in authority in the little world of my fields, and am acknowledged as overlord by my 7 servants, even when I fling the net of my thoughts most widely, I do not imagine that Pharaoh has ever heard my name, or that if he had, he would remember it. Pharaoh will never forget your name. He will not have the opportunity to you, for you will always be one of his closest friends. Me, a friend of Pharaoh? A man is not usually the friend of one who claims to be the father of his son, I said, smiling. But I am a friend of Pharaoh, and I can tell you the name of the man who will rule after him, the name of our next Pharaoh, in whose hands the crook and flail will be held in the name of Ra. I don't understand. Why do you mock me? I do not mock. His name is Senusert, and PTAH-KEFER will be the name of the royal wife. So, now he has told the secret, and this was chapter 10. And chapter 11 is the new direction. It is actually, it's part 4, and it's the first chapter in part 4, and it will be entitled The New Direction.